Welcome to this explainer. Close your eyes for a second, well, figuratively speaking, and picture the original followers of Jesus, of Nazareth. Who immediately pops into your head? Probably a group of distinguished, bearded, older guys, right? Well, get ready to have that image completely shattered. Today we're going to investigate the historical clues proving Jesus' followers weren't old men at all, but were actually kids. Yep, teenagers. We're going to walk step by step through the exact historical data, cultural contexts, and textual evidence that point to a radical youth movement at the very foundation of one of the world's major religions. Let's dive right in.
We're all incredibly used to seeing these guys in classic European oil paintings or glowing in stained glass windows, usually depicted as men in their late 40s, 50s, or even 60s. They've got receding hairlines, long gray beards, and they generally look pretty weathered. But history tells a profoundly different story. To find out who these people actually were, we have to look past centuries of artistic tradition and look directly at the laws, tax codes, and societal norms of first-century Judea. And when we do that, a completely different, much younger demographic emerges.
So our first major clue involves the temple tax. In that era, all men were legally required to pay this tax once they reached the age of 20. This wasn't merely a suggestion, guys. It was a strict societal and religious requirement. In ancient Jewish culture, turning 20 was the definitive line of adulthood, bringing with it specific financial obligations to the community and the temple. It was very similar to turning 18 today. If you were under 20, you were legally a dependent. And that specific age limit leads us to a massive clue regarding our historical suspects.
Here's where it gets wild. When the tax collectors approached the group, Jesus only supplied enough money to pay for himself and Peter. Literally no one else was asked to pay. Now, they were traveling together as a large group, yet only 2 coins were needed to satisfy the collectors. The authorities didn't arrest the rest of them for tax evasion, which means they legally recognized those followers weren't required to pay. The only valid legal reason for this exemption is age. This strongly suggests that out of the core group of 12, the vast majority were legally minors, meaning 19 years old or younger. Let's switch gears and look into Jewish oral law, which stated men should marry at 18. In the ancient world, life expectancy was a lot shorter, and survival demanded that families be started early to ensure economic stability. This wasn't modern times where you might wait until your late 20s or 30s to settle down and find yourself. The absolute cultural expectation was that an 18-year-old man should be taking a wife. If a man was in his 20s or 30s and unmarried, it was highly unusual and a subject of great societal scrutiny. This expectation gives us our next big filter. And that brings us right back to Peter. Peter is the only disciple explicitly known to have a wife. The ancient text specifically mentioned Jesus visiting Peter's mother-in-law, which confirms his marital status. But for the rest of the core group, complete silence. There are no wives mentioned, no kids left behind, nothing. When you combine that with the cultural mandate to marry by 18, the teenage theory snaps right into focus. It perfectly aligns with the temple tax data. Peter was the adult over 20 and married. The others were likely under 18 and unmarried. They were essentially high schoolers. To really illustrate this, take the brothers John and James. The historical texts tell us that when they were first called to join this movement, they were found fishing with their father Zebedee. Now, in that era, a mature man in his mid-20s or 30s would likely have his own operation, his own household, or be the head of his own fishing crew. These were kids doing their family chores. They were still apprentices in the family trade, dropping their nets to follow a charismatic new leader, rather than abandoning established, independent businesses. Now, you might be wondering, why were they teenagers? It wasn't some random anomaly. It was actually the standard educational pipeline of the era. At age 30, a Jewish man was considered fully mature and could officially become a recognized rabbi with his own followers. Jesus was roughly 30 when his ministry started, and in first-century Judea, a 30-year-old rabbi didn't recruit other 30-year-old men who were already set in their ways with established careers. The standard educational model was to recruit the brightest students straight out of the local religious schools, usually teenagers right around the ages of 13 to 15. A rabbi wanted moldable, energetic apprentices looking for a master to emulate. Jesus was just following the established rabbinical model of his day. Add to that the fact that Jesus frequently referred to his disciples as children. Throughout the source texts, you'll see translations where he addresses his followers using terms like little children or boys. For centuries, this has often been read purely as a spiritual metaphor, a wise teacher speaking affectionately to his spiritual dependents. But considering the tax exemptions and the rabbinical pipeline, the simplest explanation is probably the right one. He called them children because he was an adult trying to manage a group of actual rowdy teenagers.
Okay, let's do the final math to really seal this case. John is widely recorded as the last of the disciples to die, passing away around 60 years after this ministry ended. In the ancient world, living to be 90 or 100 was virtually unheard of. If John was, say, 40 years old when traveling with Jesus, he would have been well over 100 when he died. The math just doesn't work. But if he was a young teenager, perhaps 13 or 14 during the ministry, dying in his 70s makes perfect historical sense. This timeline mathematically ensures he was incredibly young when traveling with Jesus.
So we've analyzed the tax laws, the marriage customs, the rabbinical education traditions, and the chronological math of ancient lifespans. The evidence points overwhelmingly to a youth movement by design. Knowing this historical reality concludes with a group of teenagers changing the course of history. How does that shift your entire view of this story? Think about the implications. This wasn't a group of established, seasoned scholars who aggressively spread this message. It was a band of impulsive, energetic, unpolished youth. It completely changes the dynamic, the risk, and the energy of every single historical account they're involved in. I hope this explainer encourages you to rethink the history you thought you knew. After all, what other ancient stories might look completely different if we just adjusted the age of the main characters?